We were standing in his garden when it happened again. Late afternoon, a couple of his neighbors over, drinks on a small table near the fence. Nothing formal, just one of those casual things he liked to host. A man I hadn't met before walked up, hand already half extended. My father turned slightly, nodded toward me. "And this is my other one," he said. The man smiled like that made sense. Kept his hand out. I shook it anyway. "Daniel," I said. My father didn't correct it, didn't add anything, just moved on to the next part of the conversation like the introduction was complete. I've heard that line my entire adult life. Different rooms, different people, same phrasing. Always close enough to normal that no one questioned it. I used to think it didn't matter. Like it was just one of those things you let pass because it wasn't worth the friction. Standing there in my late 30s in a garden I'd been in 100 times, it landed differently. That should have rolled off me like it always did. It didn't. I kept my hand in my pocket after the handshake, thumb rubbing against the seam without thinking. No one else reacted. No pause. No shift in the conversation, which meant it sounded normal to everyone else. That was the part one couldn't ignore, because it meant it hadn't just been happening. It had been working. I have an older brother, James. He's 3 years ahead of me in everything that seemed to matter when we were growing up. First to hit every milestone. First to get noticed for it. School, sports, even the way people talked about him. He was always the reference point. James did this. James handled it that way. James never had a problem with that. And then there was me. Not ignored, just placed differently. The younger one, the quieter one, the one who takes his time. It never sounded negative on its own. That was part of why it worked. Nothing sharp enough to push back against. Nothing clear enough to call out. Just a constant positioning. I learned early how to move inside that. Didn't compete with him. Didn't try to match him. I built things separately. Different interests. Different pace. Different kind of life. And over time, that worked. I had my own job, my own place, my own way of doing things that didn't depend on how he was seen. People who met me outside that context didn't compare anything. They just met me. That mattered more than I thought it would. By my late 20s, I'd stopped needing anything from my father in that area. Stopped waiting for a different kind of introduction. Stopped expecting him to frame me in a way that stood on its own. Not as a decision, just it faded. He was consistent in his own way. He showed up to things, said the right kind of sentences, stayed within a range that never really changed. You could rely on that, at least. So I adjusted around it. Took what was there, didn't reach for what wasn't. That should have been enough. For a long time it was. When I met my wife, things shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just in how things were seen. She noticed details I had stopped registering. The way conversations leaned. The way certain things were phrased. At first, I brushed it off. "That's just how he talks," I said once when she asked about something small. She didn't argue it, just nodded like she was storing it somewhere. We'd been together a few years by then, long enough that she knew when something was worth pushing and when it wasn't. Most of the time, she let things sit. That was one of the reasons it worked. We didn't turn everything into a discussion. We let things be what they were unless they needed to be something else. And most things didn't. Or at least, I told myself they didn't. I remember one dinner early on, maybe a year into us being together. My father had introduced us to a couple he knew. "This is James," he said, gesturing to my brother. Then a slight shift toward me. "And this is the younger one." The couple smiled, nodded, shook hands. My wife introduced herself properly. I followed, gave my name like I always did. It passed quickly. That's how those moments usually worked. Too small to hold on to. Too normal to interrupt. Later that night, she mentioned it. Lightly. "He didn't say your name at first," she said. I shrugged. "He usually doesn't." She looked at me for a second, like she was deciding whether to say more. Then didn't. "That's interesting," she said instead. We left it there. That was 11 years ago. And in that time, nothing about it really changed. Not in a way that stood out. The phrasing shifted sometimes. The setting changed. Different people, different rooms. But the structure stayed the same. I was always introduced in relation to something else. To James. To being younger. To being the quieter one. Never just me. I didn't track it consciously. Didn't keep count. But stacked. Quietly. Moment after moment. Handshake after handshake. Each one small enough to ignore on its own. Together, something else entirely. I thought not needing it meant it stopped mattering. It didn't. It just meant I stopped looking directly at it. And as long as I wasn't looking at it, it stayed manageable. That was the arrangement. Unspoken, but steady. Nothing forced me to question it. Nothing required a response. Until that afternoon in the garden, when he said it again. And for the first time, I didn't just hear it. I saw it for what it had always been. Not a habit, not a quirk, a position. And once it was that clear, I couldn't place myself back inside it the same way again. We were in the car on the way home when I brought it up. Not immediately. We drove a few minutes first, just the sound of the road and the indicator clicking once before I turned it off. She was looking out the window, one hand resting near the door handle. Calm, like the evening had just been what it was. What do you think of how he introduces me? I said. She didn't answer right away. Not avoiding it, just measuring. I kept my eyes on the road, adjusting my grip on the steering wheel slightly. You mean earlier? She asked. Yeah. Another short pause. I've noticed it, she said. Her tone was even. Not critical, not surprised. Just stated. I nodded once, even though she wasn't looking at me. Okay, I said. She shifted a little in her seat, turning toward me just enough. I didn't want to make it bigger than it needed to be, she added. That landed cleanly. Not defensive, not careful, just honest. I tapped the indicator again out of habit, even though the road was empty. How long have you noticed it? I asked. She didn't hesitate this time. Since the first time I met him. I glanced at her for a second, then back to the road. That was 11 years ago, I said. Yeah, that should have surprised me. It didn't. It just connected things. All those small moments I hadn't held on to. She had seen them clearly from the start. Not because they were dramatic, because they were consistent. I let out a small breath through my nose, not quite a laugh. Right, I said. We drove another block in silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. I thought it was just how he talks, I added after a second. It is, she said. Then she paused just slightly. But that doesn't mean it's nothing. That line stayed there. Didn't need anything added to it. I slowed at a light, foot easing onto the brake. The car idled quietly. Red light, no cross traffic. I rested my hand on the wheel, thumb pressing lightly against the seam. It never really stood out to me before, I said. She nodded once. That makes sense, she replied. Then, after a second, you've been inside it longer than I have. That shifted it. Not the situation, just the angle. I wasn't looking at something new. I was looking at something I'd been standing in the whole time. That should have made it easier to dismiss. Like if it hadn't bothered me for that long, maybe it didn't matter now. It didn't work like that. If anything, it made it harder to ignore, because it meant I hadn't missed it. I'd adapted to it. We pulled into our street. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second without moving. The quiet inside the car settled quickly. No radio, no background noise. Just the engine ticking as it cooled. I don't think he means anything by it, I said. Not as a defense, just as a fact. I don't think he does either, she replied. Another small pause. But meaning isn't the only part of it. I leaned back slightly in the seat. That was the part one hadn't been accounting for. Intent had always been the way I filtered things. If it didn't mean it negatively, then it didn't land that way. Simple, clean. But that only worked if the outcome matched the intent. And this didn't. I thought it would feel worse hearing it out loud like this. Like it would turn into something heavier, something harder to carry. It didn't. It clarified. That was the shift. I opened the door, stepped out, then closed it with a soft click. She came around the other side, keys in hand. We walked toward the house together. No rush, no urgency. Just the normal end of a normal evening. except it wasn't sitting the same way anymore. At the door, I paused for a second, hand on the handle. Not because I was deciding anything yet, just noticing. I guess I never really corrected it, I said. She looked at me. No, she said. You didn't. There was no judgment in it, just recognition. I nodded once, then pushed the door open. That was the first time it felt like something had been left unaddressed on purpose, not overlooked, allowed. And once that distinction was there, it didn't disappear again. I started noticing it everywhere after that. Not just the bigger moments, the obvious ones, the small ones too. The quick introductions at the edge of conversations. The passing comments that didn't seem important at the time. Once it was clear, it stayed clear. I was at my desk a couple days later when it hit again. Not in real time, just a memory uninvited. A work event from a few years back. My father had come because it felt appropriate. I'd introduced him to a colleague. This is my dad, I said. He shook her hand, nodded once, then gestured back toward me. He's the quieter one, he said. At the time, it hadn't landed. It sounded harmless, even accurate, depending on how you looked at it. Now it sat differently. Not wrong, just incomplete in a way that added up. I leaned back in my chair, pushing it slightly away from the desk. The wheels caught for a second on the carpet, then rolled cleanly. It wasn't just the words. It was the positioning behind them. Every time, defined by comparison, or by absence, never just introduced as himself. I picked up a pen, tapped it once against the desk, then set it down again. That should have made me angry. It didn't. It made me tired. Not the kind that comes from a long day. The kind that comes from realizing something has been happening for longer than you've been willing to admit. 30 years of introductions. 30 years of being handed to people without a name. I thought it would feel heavier counting it like that. It didn't. It felt precise. That was worse. Later that week, I called my brother. James answered on the second ring. Hey, he said. Hey, we kept it light at first. Work, schedules, the usual. Then I brought it up. Have you ever noticed how he introduces me? I asked. A small pause. Not really, he said. What do you mean? I leaned back slightly, pressing the phone closer to my ear. He never uses my name first, I said. It's always something else. Another pause, then a short exhale like he was catching up to it. Oh, he said. Yeah, I guess. You guess. I mean, that's just how he talks, James said. He's always done that. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I know, I said. That's the problem. That landed differently. He didn't answer right away. I could hear something in the background on his end. A door closing, maybe. You're reading into it, he said finally. He doesn't mean anything by it. I didn't say he did, I replied. Then what's the issue? I paused for a second, not searching for words, just deciding how much to say. It's been 30 years, I said. At some point, it stops being neutral. He didn't respond immediately. That wasn't like him. He usually had something ready. Well, he said after a moment, I don't know what you want him to do about it now. I don't want him to do anything, I said. That was true. That was the part that had shifted. I wasn't expecting a change. I wasn't waiting for an adjustment. I'd spent too long assuming that would happen on its own. It hadn't. Then why bring it up? James asked. I turned slightly in my chair, looking out the window without focusing on anything. Because I noticed it, I said. He let out a small breath. All right, he said. Just seems like a small thing. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was wrong, because it was exactly how it stayed in place for so long. That's the only way it works, I said. What is? Small enough to ignore, I replied, but consistent enough to stick. There was a pause on the line. Not uncomfortable, just finished. All right, he said again. Fair enough. We let the conversation drift after that. Back to easier things. Plans, schedules, things that didn't require anything to be examined too closely. When the call ended, I set the phone down on the desk. Sat there for a second without moving. I thought talking about it would change something. It didn't. It just confirmed it. No one else saw it the way I did. Or if they did, they didn't feel the need to do anything about it. That left it where it had always been, with me. I leaned forward, pulled the chair back and toward the desk. Opened my laptop again. The screen lit up, emails waiting, work moving forward like it always did. Nothing had shifted outside of me. But inside, something had settled into place. Not anger, not frustration, just a decision forming. Slow but clear. If it wasn't going to change on its own, then the next move wasn't his. It was mine. Once I saw it clearly, it didn't fade again. That was the difference. Before, it would register for a second, then disappear back into everything else. Now it stayed. Not loud, not distracting, just present. I didn't bring it up again. Not with my wife. Not with James. There wasn't anything left to analyze. I wasn't trying to understand it anymore. I understood it. The only question left was what I was going to do with it. At first, I thought about saying something directly. A conversation, maybe. Something calm, controlled. Why do you do that? Can you just use my name? I played it out in my head once or twice. It didn't go anywhere. Not because it would turn into an argument. Because it wouldn't land. He would hear the words, respond in the same steady tone. And nothing underneath, it would shift. That should have frustrated me. It didn't. It made the answer simpler. I wasn't going to explain it. I wasn't going to ask him to change. That part had already been decided, whether I liked it or not. I was just going to stop accepting it. I reached for my phone on the desk, unlocked it, then locked it again without opening anything. Small movement. No purpose. Just thinking through the shape of it. The next time it happened, that was the only condition. Not later. Not in private. Not as a follow-up. In the moment. Public, the same way it had always been. That mattered more than I expected. Because that's where it had always lived. In front of other people. In those small exchanges that passed too quickly to question. That's where I'd correct it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just clearly. My name once. Nothing more. I thought that decision would feel heavier. Like something I'd have to build up to. It didn't. It felt settled. Like something that had already happened, and I was just catching up to it. That was the pattern break. I wasn't waiting for the right time. I was waiting for the next time. A few days later, I mentioned it to my wife again. Not to reopen the conversation. Just to say it out loud once. The next time he does it, I'm going to correct it, I said. She looked at me, not surprised. Okay, she said. That was it. No advice. No questions. Just acknowledgement. She picked up her mug from the table, took a sip, then set it back down. That was enough. I didn't need anything added to it. Over the next couple of weeks, nothing happened. No gatherings. No introductions. Just normal routines. Work, home, the usual rhythm. I almost forgot about it once or twice. Then something small would bring it back. A conversation at work where someone used my name before anything else. A new client introduction that was clean, direct. No qualifiers. No positioning. Just me. It made the contrast sharper. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to keep the decision in place. I thought waiting would make me second-guess it. It didn't. If anything, it made it clearer. I wasn't building toward a confrontation. There was nothing to confront. I wasn't trying to change how he saw me. That had been set for a long time. I was just done participating in it. That was the shift. Not in him. In me. 6 weeks after the garden, there was a family event. Nothing major. Just one of those gatherings where people rotate through the same conversations in different corners of the room. I walked in, said a few quick hellos. Familiar faces. Familiar rhythm. I could see him across the room, already mid-conversation with someone I didn't recognize. I didn't move toward him right away. Just stayed where I was listening to someone talk about something I wasn't fully paying attention to. Then I heard his voice shift slightly. That tone he used when he was about to introduce someone. I turned not quickly, just enough to see the angle of it. His hand gesturing in my direction. That was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. It didn't feel charged. Didn't feel like a build-up. Just expected. I straightened slightly, taking a step forward. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to meet the moment where it was happening. I thought my heart rate would jump. It didn't. Everything felt steady. Clear. This wasn't about making a point. It wasn't even about him anymore. It was just about not letting the introduction land the way it always had. And once I stepped into that, there was no version of me that stayed quiet this time. He was already mid-sentence when I stepped in. "And this is my other boy," he said. The man he was speaking to turned toward me, hand coming up automatically. Friendly, open, no hesitation. I closed the distance the rest of the way. Shook his hand. "Daniel," I said. Clear. Not loud. Just enough to sit where it needed to. The man nodded, adjusted quickly. "Nice to meet you," he said. "You too," I replied. Then, without changing tone, I added, "My father sometimes forgets which one I am." A small laugh came from him. Quick, uncertain. "Ah," he said. "Got it." The moment didn't stretch. It moved on the way moments like that usually do. Conversation shifting, attention returning to whatever they'd been talking about before. My father didn't respond, didn't correct it, didn't acknowledge it. He just continued. Same pace, same tone, like nothing had been interrupted. That should have made it feel unfinished. It didn't. I stepped back slightly, giving them space again. No one else reacted in any noticeable way. No one stepped in, no one asked anything, which was exactly how it had always worked. Small enough to pass. That was the difference. This time, I didn't let it pass without adjustment. I thought it would feel bigger, like something would shift immediately, like the room would register it in a way that matched what it meant to me. It didn't. It stayed contained. That didn't make it smaller. It made it precise. I picked up a glass from a nearby table, took a sip, set it back down. The condensation cooled against my fingers for a second before I let it go. The rest of the evening moved normally. Conversations, food, the usual rhythm of people moving in and out of small groups. My father didn't approach me. Not right away. I didn't approach him either. There was nothing left to do in that moment. It had already happened. About an hour later, I stepped out onto the back patio. Quieter there. A couple people talking near the far end, low voices, nothing I could make out clearly. I rested my hand on the railing, looking out toward the yard without focusing on anything. A minute passed. Then I heard the door open behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew it was him. "You didn't need to do that," he said. His voice was the same as always, even controlled. I turned then, facing him. He stood a few feet away, hands loosely at his sides. "Do what?" I asked. "You know what?" he replied. "That comment." I nodded once. "You introduced me as the other one," I said. He shifted slightly, weight moving from one foot to the other. "That's not what I meant," he said. I didn't push that. Didn't ask him to explain. "You've done it my whole life," I said. I just gave myself a name. That sat there. No tension in my voice. No emphasis. Just stated. He didn't respond. Not immediately. I could see him thinking, not reacting. That was familiar. He was looking for the right way to position it. The right version of the sentence. Nothing came. That was new. That was unnecessary, he said finally. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was surprising. Because it was consistent. "It wasn't," I said. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then looked past me toward the yard, like the conversation had already ended in his mind. There was no apology, no correction, nothing added to it. He turned slightly, one hand brushing the door as he stepped back inside. That was it. No raised voices, no escalation, just done. I stayed where I was for another minute, hands still resting on the railing, not replaying it, not second-guessing anything, just letting the quiet settle. I thought it would feel like a confrontation. It didn't. It felt like a correction. And once it was made, there wasn't anything left to argue about. That was the payoff. Not a reaction from him, just the absence of one. And for the first time, that felt complete. After that night, nothing dramatic followed. No fallout. No calls the next day. No message asking to clear things up. It just adjusted. Subtly at first. The next time I saw him, a few weeks later, there were other people around again. Another small gathering, same kind of setting. He introduced me once. "This is my son," he said. No name at first, but no qualifier either. Just that. It passed quickly. I gave my name like I always did. "Daniel," I said. The person nodded, we shook hands, and the conversation moved on. It wasn't a correction on his side. Not really. More like a shift in language, just enough to avoid repeating what had happened before. I noticed it, but I didn't react to it. There was nothing to reinforce. No need to point out the difference. That part was already settled. Over the next few months, it stayed like that. Sometimes my son, sometimes just a gesture in my direction and a pause for me to speak. Occasionally, nothing at all, but never the phrase again. Not once. I thought removing it would feel bigger, like something had been fixed. It didn't feel like that, because nothing underneath it had changed. The structure was still there, just slightly less visible, and that was fine. I wasn't waiting for anything deeper anymore. That was the real shift, not the language, the expectation. At home, things stayed the same. Calls now and then, short conversations that covered the surface and nothing more. We didn't revisit what happened. He didn't bring it up again. Neither did I. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been said. That used to bother me. The lack of follow-up. The absence of acknowledgement. It felt incomplete, like something had been left hanging. Now it didn't. Now it just felt accurate. I stopped measuring the relationship against something it had never been. Stopped expecting a version of him that wasn't there. And once I did that, the frustration didn't have anywhere to stay. A few months after the event, my wife asked me about it. We were sitting at the table, late evening, plates pushed slightly aside. "He hasn't said it again," she said. "No," I replied. She nodded, picking up her glass, taking a small sip before setting it down again. "That's something," she added. "Yeah," I said. "We left it there. That was enough. I thought this would feel like a victory, like I'd changed something that mattered. It didn't feel like that. It felt smaller, quieter, but also more solid, like something had been placed exactly where it belonged. There was no tension around it anymore. No waiting for it to happen again. No bracing for the next version of it. Just space. At work, in conversations, in the way people spoke to me. Nothing had ever been unclear there. My name had always been enough. It still was. That contrast didn't bother me anymore. It just reinforced something simple. You don't always get named the way you should be, but you can decide whether you answer to it. That was the line that stayed with me. Not something I planned. Just something that settled in after everything else had. Months passed, then a year. Nothing escalated. Nothing softened. It stayed consistent. Occasional contact. Neutral tone. No deeper reach in either direction. From the outside, it looked intact. Functional. Maybe even normal. And in a way, it was. Just not in the way I used to measure it. I saw him again at another family gathering. Different house this time. More people, louder room. He introduced me once, briefly. "This is my son," he said again. Then looked at me. A small pause. I stepped in. "Daniel," I said. The person smiled, repeated it. Conversation moved on. That was it. No friction. No correction needed. It worked the way introductions are supposed to work. Simple. Direct. Complete. I thought about that for a second longer than I needed to. Not because it meant something new. Because it didn't. It just held. And that was enough. The weight of it all had never been in one moment. Not the garden. Not the conversation. Not even the correction. It was the accumulation. 30 years of being slightly off-center in someone else's version of you. And the quiet decision once to step back into your own place. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just once clearly. Corrections don't always change the other person. Most of the time, they don't. They change what you accept moving forward. And that's where the shift actually lives. We still speak. We still show up to the same events. There's no open conflict. No distance that needs explaining. Just a relationship that sits exactly where it is, without anything added to it. I don't look for more anymore. That part is done. And without that expectation, there's nothing left to be disappointed by. It didn't fix anything. but changed how I carried it. I don't think he ever saw that moment the way I did, and maybe he never will. But saying my own name once was enough to stop answering to something that never fit. If you've ever had to correct something small just to feel like yourself again, you probably know what that takes. And I'm curious, have you ever let something go on for years until one quiet moment made you finally say it out loud?